August of 1862, the Sioux started to raid on settlements and trading posts. Little Crow, chief of the band, led several assaults on Fort Ridgely. The troops inside the fort fired howitzers, killing as many as 100 warriors. The Sioux continued to raid, drawing the attention of General Henry H. Sibley, who arrived at Fort Ridgely with 1,500 troops. Little Crow led more successful raids, but finally the army moved against the Sioux, and at Wood Lake the warriors were no match for the artillery. Many of the scattered Sioux escaped and fled to the Dakota Territory or further on to Canada. Those who stayed were ordered hanged by President Abraham Lincoln. On December 26, 1862, at Mankato, Minnesota, the largest mass execution in American history took place. 38 members of the Dakota Sioux were hanged. After the Civil War, a new trail discovered by John Bozeman brought more miners and settlers to Montana. The trail shortened the trip from the east, but crossed through the heart of the hunting grounds of the Cheyenne and Sioux. Soon the Sioux joined the Northern Cheyenne and Northern Arapaho to raid settlers and military patrols along the trail. In 1866, Red Cloud and other chiefs met with Army officers at Fort Laramie to discuss the new trail. While some of the chiefs signed a non-aggression treaty, Red Cloud left to prepare for war. The Army sought to reinforce Fort Reno and to add 2 new forts, Fort Phil Kearny and Fort C.F. Smith, to the Bozeman Trail route. The same year, Crazy Horse managed to deceive some soldiers sent out to find wood. The soldiers thought the Sioux were going one direction, and when they tried to avoid the party of warriors, they were led directly into an ambush. A relief party led by Captain William Fetterman fell into another trap, and the entire 80-man party was killed. More soldiers were sent, this time with breech-loading rifles, a new type of weapon that was much easier and faster to load. While the warriors chased both parties back into their forts, both suffered many casualties. Finally, with the Transcontinental Railroad south of the Platte River near completion, the government gave up. The signing of the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868 granted Red Cloud's demand for abandoning the Bozeman forts in exchange for stopping the raids. Once abandoned, the Sioux burned down the forts. With the arrival of the railroad, the source of the Plains natives' lifestyle, the buffalo, was disappearing. Not only was the new railroad frightening these once numerous animals, the soldiers and settlers were hunting them by the thousands. Additionally, by the 1870s, both sides had violated the Fort Laramie Treaty. There was also talking of a new railroad line called the Northern Pacific that attracted new settlers in the area. However, it was the discovery of gold in 1874 in the Sioux Sacred Black Hills that would be the event to cause the next round of fighting. Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse led the native warriors. General William T. Sherman and General Philip H. Sheridan led Army troops. War broke out when the military ordered native hunting bands to come into the reservations or be declared hostiles. The native warriors won a battle at Montana's Powder River in March of 1876 with heavy Army casualties. Then, in the late spring, a 3-pronged campaign was starting with General George Crook coming from the south, Colonel John Gibbon coming from the west, and General Alfred Terry with Colonel George A. Custer advancing from the east. On June 17, 1876, Crazy Horse, with 700 Sioux and Cheyenne warriors, moved against the 1,000-man force of General Crook. The native warriors' well-organized repeated attacks drove Crook's men back to their base with numerous casualties. The Sioux and Cheyenne now regrouped on a meadow called Greasy Grass along the Little Bighorn River. The total encampment contained 7,000 natives, with approximately 1,800 of them warriors. On June 21st, Terry's and Gibbon's columns united. Major Marcus Reno's scouting party reported the general location of the native camp, and Terry sent Custer's 7th Cavalry to cut them off while the rest of the troops approached from the north. When Custer's scouts discovered the encampment, instead of waiting for the rest of the army, Custer organized for an immediate attack. His plan proved disastrous, and on June 25th, Custer's entire force of approximately 200 men was wiped out. This would be the last major victory for the warriors, led by Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse, and Chief Gall. The next 6 months would show to be disastrous for the natives. Both Sioux and Cheyenne would lose a number of battles and many soldiers. As a result of that, Sitting Bull and his band fled to Canada. Crazy Horse surrendered in 1877, only to be killed while resisting orders for his imprisonment. Sitting Bull returned in 1881 and surrendered at Fort Buford. He was moved to the Standing Rock Agency and was killed in 1890 while resisting arrest. The final chapter of the wars would be played out in 1890. Wovoka, a Paiute mystic, started the ghost dance movement. He preached that the ghost dance would bring the old world back. The dead would come alive, the buffalo would return, and all whites would be removed from the plains. In order to make the event happen, Native American warriors should dance the ghost dance. To the poor, defeated, and disappointed people, most living on reservations, the new religion gave them hope. It was also thought that the ghost dance shirts would protect the wearer from white men's bullets. In November of 1890, the U.S. government banned the ghost dance on the Sioux reservations. Indian police were ordered to arrest Sitting Bull, a staunch supporter of the ghost dance. In the scuffle that ensued, Sitting Bull and 6 of his warriors were killed. Bigfoot was also to be arrested, but before soldiers arrived, he and his followers set out for the Pine Ridge Agency. General Nelson Miles, now in charge of the Division of the Missouri, sent the 7th Cavalry under Major S.M. Whitside to intercept the band of Sioux. When the cavalry finally found the tribe, the soldiers ordered them to camp for the night at Wounded Knee Creek. On the morning of December 29th, while Bigfoot and other leaders were meeting with the Army officers, a rifle accidentally discharged. Colonel James Forsyth, who had arrived to take charge, ordered the troops to shoot. Artillery was used to cut down those men, women, and children trying to flee the carnage. More than 250 people, including Bigfoot, had been killed. This ended the almost 40-year battle by the Sioux to retain their lands and way of life. 20th and 21st centuries. After the hostilities ended, the government forced tribes into sending their children to boarding schools. Boarding schools were intended to, quote, kill the Indian to save the man, which meant the destruction of native societies. Children were taken away from their families. They were dressed in American clothing, given English names, had their hair cut, and were forbidden to speak their languages. Their religions and ceremonies were also outlawed and forbidden. The goal was to teach academic studies in English, vocational skills suited to American society, such as farming, in order to replace traditional lifestyles. These schools were overcrowded and had poor sanitary conditions, which led to infectious diseases and students running away or dying at those schools. In 1934, the Indian Reorganization Act sought to overturn many of the policies of the past by reversing the traditional goal of cultural assimilation of the tribes into American society. It ended land allotment, prohibited non-consensual land seizure, recognized tribal governments, encouraged the writing of tribal constitutions, and empowered Native people to manage their own resources. Between 1934 and 1945, the tribes would vote on their government constitutions, although some tribes refused or used their older constitutions. In the 20th century, the government passed few acts that both helped and harmed Native communities. As the civil rights movement peaked, Native Americans founded the American Indian movement. Conflicting political values would create long-lasting tensions on the reservations. The accusations of corruption by tribal leaders would lead to the Wounded Knee Siege, which began on February 27, 1973, when the town of Wounded Knee, South Dakota, was seized by followers of the American Indian movement. The occupiers controlled the town for 71 days, while various state and federal law enforcement agencies, such as the FBI and the United States Marshal Service, laid siege. Natives protested what they said was the local corrupt government, along with federal issues affecting Native reservation communities. Native Americans from many other communities, primarily urban areas, mobilized to come and join the occupation. The siege lasted for 71 days.